Hello everybody, this is Jason Yee from Train 2.0, and in this video we're going over how to go from the lean and push shot to the effortless slingshot. And what does this look like in practice? It looks like stuff like this effortless slingshot style of shot. And how are we going to do that? Well, where we are here is we're on week 1 of 6 of a 6-week coaching transformation. And I'm going to publish the first 3 weeks of this coaching program for free on YouTube. And then the last 3 weeks are available within something called the Slingshot shooting system. And at the end of the video and in the description, I'll give you information on how to get started with that. But in the meantime, let's talk about our journey here. So in week 1, we're going to unlearn unnatural mechanics, and that's this week here. Because I'm going to show you this week how a lot of the things that you're told are not necessarily wrong, but they could be misleading and they could be holding back your shot if they're being interpreted the wrong way. Week 2 is about installing natural mechanics. So you can't go about unlearning, or you can't go about installing these natural mechanics on top of unnatural mechanics. So you have to unlearn them, and then you can install some more natural mechanics. Then we're going to talk about a cue called grabbing the ice. Then in week 4, we're going to talk about the footwork. And this is where it gets funny, because if you get the first 3 weeks right, then the last 3 weeks are all about footwork. It actually has nothing to do with your upper body. So week 4 is about your footwork for explosive rotation to really give you the most powerful shot. Week 5 is about giving you footwork for balance so that you can be taking shots in any situation. And then week 6 is about footwork for deception. So going beyond, one-timers and having a powerful shot, but really being able to deceive a goalie. And that's what the weeks are going to look like. So without further ado, let's jump into unlearning unnatural mechanics this week. And the first thing to realize is that you want to remove the pebble in your shoe. So think about it. If you're wanting to run a marathon, is it more useful to, and let's say you have a pebble in your shoe, is it more useful to remove the pebble in your shoe or train really hard and drink the perfect protein drink and carb drink and have infrared saunas at night or whatever, right? Is it more helpful to remove the negative? Is it more helpful to remove the pebble in your shoe or add a positive? And in almost every case, removing the negative is more powerful and leads to a way better result than adding a positive. So before you start training more or getting extra training aids or any sort of thing, the first step is to remove the pebble in your shoes, to unlearn the unnatural mechanics. And we're going to go over a few of those. Now, earlier in my heyday, I was apt to throw rocks at people who would use what I would call the wrong cues. But what I've really discovered is that not that these are wrong cues. It's just that these cues might lead you down the wrong path, and they need to be distinguished. And what do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at, hands out as a cue. And we can look at this McKinnon shot here. And a lot of coaches use the cue hands out. And it's clear that right here, McKinnon's getting his hands out. But you can also look at plenty of other shots where the hand doesn't get out away from the body. Here we see the hand out. But how do you really solve the fact that the hand ends up coming back in? Or there's another example right here where we see with Marchand, and you can see again his hand does move out, but then notice how it comes right back in, right into his chest and right into his hip right here. So how do you resolve that? And another great example is leaning into your stick. There's a really awesome look at it here where what you'll see is, you'll often hear people, oh, you need to lean on your stick and you need to really flex your stick. Well, look how in this example right here, does anyone see any leaning on the stick? Yet notice how much the stick flexes as we are just contacting the puck. So this is pretty cool that a lot of the stick flex comes from the rotation and just the counter movement and counterweight of the puck. We don't see anyone leaning on a stick here to flex the stick. In the last, the second last cue that might lead you down the wrong path is shifting your weight. And we can go back to this Marchand example where what we see is, he's shooting off of his left foot here, and he's not shifting his weight from one foot to the other from the beginning of the shot here where he begins to load it to the end of his shot. Like, he's not shifting his weight foot to foot in the typical sense, right? He's staying all on one foot from loading to release, right? So that's the second last cue that might lead you astray. And then the fourth one is don't brush it off, right? You often hear coaches say, don't brush it off. Don't stick handle prior to the shot. And you know what? There's a lot of opportunities where players over stick handle, where they stick handle too much. But it's a mistake to say that all the time you shouldn't brush it off. Because if we watch McKinnon here, we can see how he's clearly stick handling prior to the release, and that may even factor into the deception of his release and how he's able to beat the goalie. So the important thing here is that if someone hears the cue hands out and then interprets that their hand should stay out all the time, they're going to have unnatural mechanics. But if they interpret it that your hand is supposed to come out and then back in, as in the case of Marchand here, where his hands definitely come away from the body and then pull back into the chest, if we interpret the cue that way, then the shot really works. Same for leaning into your stick. Like, if you are interpreting this to mean that you shouldn't get stick flex, well, then you might not have the best shot. But if you interpret this to mean that you really actually have to lean on your stick, you're going to be often off balance when you're shooting. You can see right here, there's really no leaning on the stick. It's all just the weight of the puck and a tiny bit of ice friction to create that whip on the stick. A pretty cool view right there. And this is the kind of thing we couldn't used to see before, right? Because we didn't have this type of slow motion breakdown. And shifting your weight, right? Again, sometimes you end up shifting your weight. There are definitely situations where you end up shifting your weight, but then there's also situations where you absolutely don't shift your weight. I mean, here's a really good example of it right here. We can see that we're planted and the weight is even on both feet before shooting. There's literally zero weight shift there. And there are different times where you do shift your weight. So the whole idea here is I wanted to just draw attention to 4 cues that are not necessarily wrong, but if interpreted the wrong way, might lead you down the wrong path. And here's what I often see. Players who hear the hands out cue, they get stuck pushing the puck instead of really whipping the puck. A great example of that would be right here. Pull this up here. You can really see how Kuhn is really whipping that puck by pulling that top hand back. And you can see how a big part of this is that he's getting his hands out and then whipping the hands right back in. That causes a real whip effect. And if you are following the cue hands out, you might not get that whip effect. Same with leaning into your stick. Same thing here. I mean, we see a really great shot here from Tarasenko. And again, we see that flex of the stick. There's a massive stick flex, but he's not leaning into his stick, right? What he's actually doing is he's pushing through the puck, and the puck is creating a lot of the friction, and the ice is creating a tiny bit of friction, but he's not leaning forward into the stick, and that would cause him to be off balance. and then shifting your weight. Same thing, even on this shot with Tarasenko, he actually doesn't really shift his weight at all. You can see how he keeps both feet planted and has zero weight shift. And these cues, brushing it off, don't brush it off, shift your weight, lean into your stick, hands out, might lead you down the wrong path. You can still definitely see shots where the hands come out, where you do have stick flex, where you have to shift your weight, and when it's appropriate not to brush it off. But what ends up happening is if you head down the wrong path and you interpret these the wrong way, you end up with the wrong mechanics. And that's really what this coaching is all about today. So your coaching this week is really to understand that repetition plus awareness equals mastery. And this is not to say that we're going to go over what the natural mechanics are next week. But what we're really doing this week is I want you to get a lot of reps. And I recommend that you use a floorball stick for this. And what I want you to focus on is the feel of the shot and the result, not any cues. I want you to actually become aware of what cues you're doing consciously and what cues are natural. And I want you to test how shooting naturally feels. So you're going to do at least 300 passes this week and at least 300 shots this week. Literally paying attention to just how it feels. One thing you might want to do is pay attention to these cues and kind of think about which ones are you internalizing and which ones, if you actually forget about them, actually end up feeling a lot more natural. And that is where the repetition plus awareness comes in. Is not just taking the coaching cues. Don't listen. I always say this, don't listen to any coach, including me. You really want to trust how your body feels. And so that's your coaching for this week, is to be aware of a few of these cues that are not necessarily wrong. They just might lead you down the wrong path. And if we distinguish when hands out, lean into your stick, shift your weight, and don't brush it off are correct for the context, then you have an idea of when to use it and when not. And you can really begin installing natural mechanics in your shooting. So that is your coaching for the week. Now, if you want to learn more about this, I'm preparing a link to Train 2.0 where you can learn more about the Slingshot shooting system, what the Train 2.0 membership looks like. And if you want to continue on with this, you can click the link to get more information. Otherwise, we'll see you next week for week 2 on installing the natural mechanics once you've brought awareness to what these unnatural mechanics might be. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.